Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from AP 215B. I am Najah and my fellow friends are Hakim, Helmi, Nabil, Dina and also Alia will present about the best practice in the developing and developed countries on the housing market. So we choose the developing country is in India while the developed country is in New Zealand. United Nations classified the country into two groups, which is the developed country and also developing country. It is classified by the economic state, such as the average income per capita, the gross development product, the life rates, the birth rates, and many more. So, the developed country is a country that have a high gross domestic product. They have the high average income per capita, they have the high human development, and also for your information, in this developed country, the majority of the population will receive the higher education and also the high quality of healthcare. While the developing country, they are the countries that have low gross development product, low human development, low average income per capita. So this is the difference between the developed and developing country. So in this presentation, we will present about how the developed and developing country manage their housing market, such as the housing demand, housing price, and many more.
So, I will be briefly explain on comparison of housing demand in India and New Zealand. In India, the housing market is characterized by excess demand for affordable housing, a small rental market and an oversupply of high-end housing, particularly in urban region. Besides that, housing demand is larger in rural areas where large majority of the population lives and among low-income groups. In India, the rapid rise in population and income has led in an increase in housing demand despite many public housing initiatives that has increased supply. However, the housing crisis persists. Approximately 40 million families experienced shortage of housing in 2015. According to the government estimates, this include the homeless and family living in substandard, overcrowded housing and property without an access to essential services such as schools, public space and other. Whereby the housing demand in New Zealand is increasing is because the crisis has worsened dramatically since the pandemic, with the ultra-low interest rates and a faster than anticipated economic recovery compounding pre-existing issues of affordability and supply. Based on The Guardian 2021, housing crisis that has been faced in New Zealand, the median price in Auckland and Wellington is now $1,100,000, up to 35% year-on-year in the capital city. Small towns, however, are feeling the heat. The national median house price increased by nearly 23% year-over-year to $780,000. This issue caused many people turn to the Ministry of Social Development for help as the scarcity of affordable housing fuels this demand, driving up home prices and rent in New Zealand.
The comparison of housing supply in India and New Zealand. In India, we generally know that they experience a hard time with overpopulations. This issue caused a lack of housings that being provided to the people. Also, the housings in rural area are not well prepared and it is not a decent home for human being. For example, the housings area have inadequate housing facilities. They lack the basic amenities for clean water and safe sanitations. The house are also said to be too old and unfit for human habitations, meaning the constructions are not prepared for the post-disaster reconstruction. In India, the housing supply initiative being hard is because of the weak property rights and the land acquisitions costs are high. In New Zealand, the issues that being highlighted is poverty and equality. The problems are not as bad as India, but New Zealand does not provide enough housings for middle and low income. Even as one of developed country, New Zealand have the least affordable housings and the existing ones are not in the top conditions. For example, the house are uninsulated, damp and cold. The house sometimes too overcrowded where there are too many people living in one house. This can cause a problem when social distancings are needed, especially during COVID-19. Lastly, they got a lot of restrictions when they rent a house. The ones who live in the house does not have the ownership of the house.
The comparison of price for housing at India and New Zealand. Firstly, during the pandemic COVID-19, the disruptive impact of the second COVID-19 wave in Asia's third largest economy will stifle price risk by crushed demand and balancing government advantage to real estate developers in the form of subsidies and incentives. Analysis forecasts a 1.3% average increase in house price in a poll conducted in January 2021. Then India housing affordability has greatly improved since 2015. JM Financial Institutional Securities Ltd state in report date 24 May 2021 that house affordability in India had improved over time, owing the fact that annual salaries have been rising while property prices have remained relatively stable since 2015. Next, house prices in New Zealand are continuing to grow aided by ultra-low loan rate and limited housing supply.
Next, the different policy between India and New Zealand. India as a developing country has model state affordable housing policy to assist all people, in particular the houseless, to secure themselves affordable shelter through access to developer land within material, finance and technology. While for New Zealand, they more focus on balance on the gap between income and house price. Number 2, local authority and NGO provide funding to build affordable housing for low-income households and take active measurement to support local housing and or low-income refloating program. While India policy is to create a vibrant, sustainable and inclusive rental housing market in India. Number 3, India Housing for All (HFA) policy is providing a house with a water connection, toilet facilities, electric supply and access. This policy more to facilities and supply to every family in India, while in New Zealand, the policy focus on building defects. New Zealand local government target to decrease in home building defect and in water type problem.
There are few recommendations that both developed and developing countries need to improve. The first one is the government need to propose more affordable housing schemes, which is related on the SDG 11 Sustainable Cities and Communities. In other hand, the both countries need to improve in terms of housing conditions, as we know that in India they are lacking on the amenities as they not provide a clean water and a proper sanitation. This can be related on the SDG 6, which means in order to develop a sustainable countries, these elements are really important. While in New Zealand, the housing conditions in terms of sufficiency housing facilities is quite adequate, as most of the housing is lacks with heating appliances. The last recommendation is improve the law enforcement to ensure the housing in both countries is well managed. As in India, we can see the housing supply is not sufficient, where the land acquisitions are highly cost and do not provide an affordable housing capital stocks to the people who have a financial problem. While in New Zealand, the rental property is giving too much freedom for the tenants. It means that the tenants can set the price without any limitations. On the other hand, it also contains a lot of restrictions where the lease terms are short and the tenants can be asked to move abruptly with a short notice.
As what can be concluded, these both developed and developing countries do have their own issues related to the housing demand, supply, pricing and policies. India has the worst housing issues rather than New Zealand.